Sonic Superstars, once again a large title welcoming back the reintroduction of classic Sonic. How many times are we going to do this for? This game brings a lot to the table, and it's too bad because more than half of it absolutely sucks, and I wish I was kidding. A lot of these issues especially become a lot more apparent as you progress throughout the game. So what we're going to look at today is how Superstars is, whether it's worth the price tag it's advertising itself with, fuck no, and what you should expect from this brand new title with the millionth iconic return of classic Sonic. And hopefully by the end of the video you'll have a chance to see for yourself if this game is satisfying enough for you or disappointing just like it was for me. Also, do keep in mind that this review will contain heavy spoilers. So without any other delays, let's take a look at the newest title for the Blue Blur, Sonic Superstars. Before diving into any of the game's new content, let's talk about some of the early beginnings for this title. Following the success of Sonic Mania in 2017, Sonic Team once again approached Christian Whitehead and discussed ideas for another potential 2D Sonic game. Some concepts and ideas were offered for this new title, and along with this, Sonic Team wished to shift away from pixel art like in previous titles and head into the 3D assets territory. These weren't the only options though, and talk of hand-drawn 2D and 2.5D visuals were also discussed. In the end, Whitehead decided to shelve the project when Whitehead's team moved on to concentrate on their own game, Penny's Big Breakaway. So although Whitehead did not have a direct involvement in the development of Sonic Superstars, Sonic's team did end up using the Code of Mania for the physics, thus resulting in being credited at the end of the game with Evening Star. And on the note of Sonic Team, funnily enough, the idea for this game was made over a drunk Zoom call. That habit might have leaked a little bit into the development of the game, but hey, I've made worse decisions drunk before. Eventually though, Iizuka and Oshima soon saw similar interest in working together to create a 2D Sonic game and began exploring many different concepts for what would become Sonic Superstars. So with questionable beginnings out of the way, let's talk about the one thing Sonic games mostly never get right: the story. Similarly to Sonic Frontiers, this game once again presents an animation on the official Sonic YouTube channel that offers extra background knowledge. The animation titled Trio of Trouble begins with Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy gathering around in an abandoned temple. They all turn their heads upward and gaze at Fang the Hunter and his marvelous queen. Also, don't worry, this isn't some illusion like in Sonic Mania, this is the true Fang making a return from the very well received Triple Trouble on the Game Gear. And what better way for Fang to make a return than holding a green Chaos Emerald? After seeing this, the four spread across the temple as Fang's ship unleashed its missiles, allowing the team to hide behind the pillar. They agreed to attempt to confuse the Marvelous Queen's tracking system, allowing Sonic and Tails to fuck with Fang. After being beaten, Fang awakened in an old tunnel from a nightmare, colliding with Dr. Eggman and Trip's spacecraft. Trip is also a new character, but don't worry, we'll get to her later. They begin their journey, and during which, Eggman tramples over a flower which Trip intended to admire, and this ends up setting off a bunch of booby traps. To escape the traps, Fang charges his Marvelous Queen through a wall with Trip and Eggman, landing them in a vast chamber with a painting portraying individuals similar to Trip's race, which Eggman ends up approaching. It's from here that we can see a mural with hieroglyphics representing each of the Chaos Emeralds and the abilities that each one seems to represent. Something new introduced in this game. Out of everything that seemed to pique Robotnik's interest though is the dragon-looking creature in the middle of the mural. While Robotnik's busy checking outdated art, a giant snake begins pursuing Fang, and eventually with Trip's help they both actually defeat the large snake, and while Trip offers a handshake on a job well done, it's here when Fang offers this kind gesture that we get kind of the idea that the relationship these two characters have. When the camera pans back to Robotnik, he makes an attempt to draw the creature but ends up with whatever the fuck this is. And that's it for the animation. One small complaint I have between this animation and the Frontiers Knuckles one is that Knuckles one feels kinda optional. This one feels like you should watch it before playing Superstars, which at that point just put it at the start of the game. I mean, is it that hard? Everything here seems integral to the plot, and so really I do think that this is probably the first cutscene you should have watched instead of just Robotnik giving Fang rings. Another thing to mention though is that it's genuinely shocking how beautiful this animation looks, and then in the game we get this. Like, it's not the worst thing ever, but it's obviously a visual downgrade. Once the game starts, you see only a small bit of time has passed where now Robotnik captures these really obese flickies and pays Fang for what we can expect was from the animation to find the dragon-looking thing. You see why this prologue animation was so important? Anyway, it would have been nice for context, but now we have Sonic and Tails flying in the tornado, and this is where we get our first look at the gameplay. See, the thing is, normally when I start any Sonic game, I'm picking Sonic to see how he feels in any or each classic Sonic game. But just like Sonic 3 or Mania, you are also able to choose from 4 characters, being Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy respectively. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles play almost exactly as if they were ripped out of Mania, which is completely fine. One small note though, which isn't really an issue, but it could have been a nice addition, is that Sonic lacks any way to unlock or use any of his previous abilities like the Peel Out or Insta Shield, so you're kinda just locked to the Drop Dash. Amy though is the new character, seeing her first time being playable in Sonic Origins Plus. However, she plays pretty similarly, but not exactly. In Origins, her hammer is normally used like a drop dash that allows you mid-run to turn around on a dime, or on the other hand, Amy could also use her hammer in a very similar manner as you would an insta-shield. But in this game, her hammer functions more as her jump ball, and the game just calls it a hammer attack. This is literally just a spin jump with a different name. It's the same shit! In Superstars, she received a new ability by having a double jump. Yep, that's her power. This must be why they got rid of the electric shield for whatever the fuck this magnet power-up is. One neat feature that this game introduces is tutorials for every character in the case that you don't know how to play a Sonic game. Don't worry, little Timmy, this feature was added just for you. Moving on, Sonic Superstars consists of 11 zones, being Bridge Island, Speed Jungle, Sky Temple, Pinball Carnival, Lagoon City, Sand Sanctuary, Press Factory, Golden Capital, Cyber Station, Frozen Base, and Egg Fortress. I won't even lie, it's actually quite refreshing to see a classic Sonic game with all original zones, as this is something that Sonic fans have been asking for like literal years. One thing I can't look past though is why certain zones like Sky Temple, Sand Sanctuary, and Cyber Station get singled out and have only one act. There's literally no story reason behind it, so I don't get why this is happening. I personally think that they have some of the coolest ideas for zones, and it feels weird just to single them out like this. It just feels like a waste of assets not to give them a treatment of a full zone for no reason whatsoever. A nice addition to each zone though are these bonus levels. They are unlocked at the end of Act 2 via opening the animal capsule and getting this arrow to land on the fruit. Although this is a super cool gimmick, it feels annoying to have the bonus level literally be unlocked from RNG, especially if you don't feel like replaying certain levels. This whole fruit unlocking thing maybe would have worked better if it was tied to the ring count or maybe just how fast you complete a stage. Now when it comes to the bonus levels themselves, there are two variations. The fruit bonus levels are stages that scroll vertically upwards and you have to collect rings, and you get rewarded medals based on how many rings you collect. These medals can also be used to buy cosmetics for the battle mode, but we'll touch more on that later. As for the second variation for bonus levels, those are the character levels, which involve you being forced to play a certain character and having the level design being built around them. Now most of these character levels are optional, but later down the line you will need to play as Amy to help Trip for the sake of the story when she's all alone. Another neat feature added in Superstars are these hub worlds, which feel very similar to the white space hub world from Sonic Generations. You can always head back to the hub world after beating a level, where here you can swap the character you'd like to play as. Now for me, this is a really nice feature because you aren't locked into one singular character per playthrough. Another really neat thing about this game is that if you have a friend or three, you can actually play with up to 4 players at once, and they can just join at any moment during the game just by connecting another controller. Now while the 2-player mode is a lot of fun and it works well for the most part, the 4-player mode is just chaotic. I mean, look at this. Most of the time, at least 2 of the players are always off screen, and it just genuinely feels as crazy as 8-player Smash Bros would. As for the level design itself, it works for the most part, where I feel like I can go fast at a good pace and still explore the levels, which is a lot of fun, but sometimes the gimmicks that the stages present interrupt the flow of gameplay to a point where it becomes very annoying to deal with. For example, in Press Factory Act 2, you have this mech in the background where if it charges all the way up, you instantly die unless you press this button, so that's just great. Special stages also make a return, finding a new way to recollect these 7 gemstones. The way to enter the said special stages is Sonic 3 and Sonic Mania style, needing you to explore and find the rings, but don't worry, not a lot of exploring needs to be done. Most of the time, the rings are literally right in front of your face. The way the stages work is via swinging on these blue orbs towards the emerald. I won't even lie to you, the fear of God got put into me when I first saw these special stages because I immediately thought of the Sonic Lost World 3DS special stages. Another neat thing is that in the multiplayer mode, you can also play the special stages all together, but it might do some more harm than good. Something I noticed, at least during my playthrough, are that these special stages are pathetically easy and really took me less than a minute to complete most times, except Special Stage 5 for some reason. Fuck you, Special Stage 5, go to hell. Another small addition is that the bonus levels are recreations of Sonic 1 special stages, so that's pretty cool, I guess. One really cool thing introduced in Sonic Superstars is now that each Chaos Emerald actually has its own unique power-up. Most of them are actually pretty useless, except for the Blue Emerald, which offers this clone attack, which makes a barrage of the character you are, and this is the one I commonly use to cheese most of the bosses. The Red Emerald, which grants this burst attack, which is literally just the abilities of the Burst Wisp, but hey, you're taking something good out of something bad. Don't worry, I won't miss the wisps. And lastly, the power of the Yellow Emerald, which is a slowdown ability, which can again be useful mainly for the bosses. This ability actually reminded me of the double gear system from Mega Man 11, but specifically the speed gear, which effectively granted the same effect. As for the other Emerald powers, who fucking cares? I didn't use them, and any of the ones I didn't mention are basically useless. As for the bosses themselves, they follow the same formula as seen before, with Act 1 presenting a mini-boss and Act 2 having you deal actually with Robotnik. Now one thing I noticed, especially later game, is how time-consuming these Act 2 bosses are. Seriously, a lot of them drag on for so long and take so much time that they literally become extremely tedious to go through and end up taking more time than the actual levels themselves. That is a huge problem for me. This hence introduces another reason as to why the fruit bonus stages shouldn't have been RNG based to unlock. Another thing I really noticed, at least for my first playthrough, was honestly the absence of Fang, at least for the most part. I mean, sure, he was here and there every once in a while, but he didn't really feel like the main antagonist, which is what I thought they were going for. As for the final boss, you actually see this extremely cool gimmick where you played the level in reverse, so that's actually kinda neat. As for the final boss itself, guess what? It's another version of the Death Egg. I genuinely wonder if they try sometimes. This boss has two phases. In phase 1, you run behind its back and jump at these blue missiles that damage it, and in between turns you need to avoid either these laser walls, electric projectiles, or straight up being hit by his arm. When enough damage is done, you'll move on to phase 2 and you'll end up needing to run away from the Death Egg until he makes himself vulnerable. The second phase of this fight actually quite reminds me of Sonic 3 and Knuckles' final boss. And do you know what's crazy? Almost 3 decades later, and it's still the same boss. Once you defeat the final boss, you watch Sonic run out of the Death Egg and escape into a pod. This boss fight, in my opinion, is just really simple, and it just needs you to memorize the pattern and cheese the emerald powers on it, and you're good to go. As for the final scene of the main story, shit you not, this scene is literally the exact same in Sonic 4 Episode 2, where Sonic runs out of the Death Egg and jumps into an escape pod to escape. Don't worry folks, that won't be the only comparison to Sonic 4 in this video. After an animated cutscene and credits scroll by, guess what? No supersonic ending. Yeah, and my friends who have also played the game and didn't collect all the emeralds said that the ending doesn't change regardless. So, great. One thing to mention though is that completing the main story does actually unlock some post-game content, finally giving us a chance to meet the brand new character in Trip the Sungazer. Similar to Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Trip's story is basically the Knuckles route, and you have a replay of the entire game with level design changes. Trip even deals with the Egg Robo instead of Robotnik to add it all up. Trip actually plays in quite an interesting way. She has the double jump of Amy, but now when jumping in the air, she can cling to walls very similarly to how the Spike Wisp works in Sonic Colors. I stay winning! VMEG 2, Wisp 0. Another great design on Trip other than her actual design itself, which I'm a huge fan of, is her jump ball, which actually reminds me a lot of Vector's from Chaotix, and actually having this whole jump with a hole in it. As for Trip's levels, this mode is strictly one player, and this game also considers this the hard mode. And for once, they actually weren't lying. Most of the levels in the first half seem fine, but over time actually become really frustrating to play through. Enemy placement is Metropolis Zone styled, random unpredictable bottomless pits here and there, and holy shit, the number of spikes everywhere is actually baffling. For a good while, I thought this was on par with a Super Mario World Kaizo level. Along with the already annoying level design, sometimes there are just straight up shitty design gimmicks, like having the Egg Robo shoot at you from the background without being able to stop it at all or doing anything about it. The amount of times this screwed me over, I'm honestly not proud of, but it's genuinely super annoying. Also, all the bonus stages, specifically in the character levels, actually become additional acts that Trip herself will play through. And another annoying thing I have to constantly need to deal with was the already time-consuming bosses now have even more health and became a little bit more difficult. Why the fuck would you ever make the longest bosses ever take even longer? Sega, what is wrong with you? The only thing that really saves these bosses at all, unsurprisingly enough, is Trip's super form, which I purposely chose not to talk about until now, because it's actually one of the most unique things about her. Unlike other characters, she becomes this dragon who can fly and breathe fire, which is cool for the first 5 minutes you use it for, because I realize it interrupts the flow of gameplay, especially when it's very apparent the level design was not built for how her super form works except for like one level. She flies around, and the problem with that is just how stiff her form controls. So most times I wasn't even using it unless it was for cheesing a boss fight. In general though, a lot of Trip's story, at least after the halfway point, became very unenjoyable for me. The level design was honestly unfair at times, the gimmicks added to make the game harder only seemed to be there to infuriate me, and it didn't help that everything I found mildly annoying in the main story got cranked up from 10 to 100, and the difficulty spike in this game was genuinely crazy. At some point, the only thing I was looking forward to was beating the game and just being done with it. As for the final boss, this is where it's prominently different. Once again, you are put into a 2-phase boss, this time against Fang. Instead of the casual Death Egg running behind the back strat, you'll actually need to be careful and dodge one-hit KO lasers and dodge Fang when he tries to break the stage, and in between attackable turns, you also have to avoid missiles chasing you. This boss, although difficult, actually isn't too bad for the first phase once you get the hang of it. It's when stepping into phase 2 territory that you'll start seeing some trouble. Phase 2 actually has you fighting this huge mech in the shape of Fang himself. Now you may say to yourself, how narcissistic can you be to have this built? Counterpoint? Who can blame the guy? This thing looks sick as hell. And you know what else will be sick as hell? If you press that like and subscribe button. If you like what you're watching so far, you might find my other videos pretty enjoyable too. The second phase of this fight, like the original final boss fight, will have you running behind the mech and attacking with projectiles. Now what made this fight so hard for me personally was during these non-attackable turns, Fang activates these webs of stasis, which right after, he will literally shoot a fucking log at you, and you get an interesting death animation with Trip hitting the screen. Now through enough trial and error, Trip eventually does give Fang a taste of his own medicine, and we get a similar cutscene as before, except Trip makes a return to Sonic and Tails and meets up with all the Flickies. Now truthfully, Trip's story is great, but only to a certain point. Although Trip herself has an amazing design and is a lot of fun to play, and in my opinion the most fun character and the best character in this game, her story has to be one of the most infuriating parts of Sonic Superstars. Genuinely, this was a screenshot of my face that a friend of mine took right after I wrapped up the story mode. Her levels feel at times extremely unfair to the point of sucking all the fun out of the game. Now surprisingly enough, past Trip's story is actually even more post-game content, which is... no fucking way. No fucking... Super Sonic? Are you kidding me? Honestly, yeah, I couldn't believe it myself when I laid my eyes on this. Sonic Team really put a Super Sonic final boss after a forced worst replay of the whole game just to get the true ending. That right there, my friends, is terrible game design. And also, I should mention this game isn't short by any means. A full playthrough of this game took me nothing short of about 5 hours, while other classic titles took me maybe 2.5 at most, so this is definitely the longest classic Sonic game. The worst of it all is that without saying anything, this has to be the worst supersonic boss of any Sonic game. Ever. Okay, so get this. When you start the story, a black hole shows up out of nowhere, and a dragon shows up out of the blue, and it's just never explained. It's just here for shit and giggles, I guess. Sonic is then put into his super form and is put into the hub world. Now, even still up to this point, nothing is explained. At all. We then get the introduction scene with one of the worst models I think I've seen thus far. Seriously, this thing looks like it was ripped right out of Balan Wonderworld. My jaw was on the floor because I couldn't believe Sega added this thing into the game and said, yeah, $60 or $70 is a good price for this game. Fun fact, it's not. This random dragon then fights Super Sonic, and throughout the fight is very akin to other bosses like in Doomsday in Sonic 3 and Knuckles or Egg Reverie in Sonic Mania, which results in you flying around collecting rings to stay in your super form. You also get moments where you get to attack the dragon-like creature with meteors flying in, or you could just ram yourself into it. The dash from Sonic Mania also makes a return which can be used to attack. In addition, you can also find Sonic's friends flying around helping you by dropping in rings. And when enough damage is done, the second phase begins, and, well, I literally have no clue how to describe the look of this thing. During the second phase, you get some more unique attacks, but it's really nothing you've never seen before. After doing enough damage, Sonic will just ram into the dragon, killing it. We then get another animated cutscene where Trip pulls this egg from the original mural from the Tree of Trouble animation out of her ass. Right after this, the dragon gets captured in the egg, and then we pan to everyone being happy and view the original sketch Robotnik made. And while everyone's being happy, guess what? I'm not happy. Nothing is explained. This dragon came straight out of a black hole with no context, and Sonic beats it up, and Trip captures it in an egg that is pulled from Narnia, and I'm just supposed to overlook that? I can't. The last mode I'll be touching upon in this video is the battle mode. In this initial mode, you take on the role of a basic robotic character referred to as a prototype. This character can be personalized by acquiring different body parts from the in-game shop using the medals you collect through the game as currency. Furthermore, you have the option to modify the patterns and the colors of the prototype, and although these customizations do have a lot of limitations, however they do allow you to resemble well-known characters such as Metal Sonic and Metal Knuckles, who is a character who hasn't been seen since Sonic R. The mode itself offers both online multiplayer with a maximum of 8 players and local multiplayer with up to 4 players. Each minigame in the battle mode comes with a unique mission. These missions include a hazardous survival match, a traditional race to the finish, and a mode where you collect stars, which actually reminded me of the battle mode in New Super Mario Bros. DS. This game also features customizable skins for this game, not specifically for the battle mode, but things like a Lego collab, a modern Amy skin, and even a skin representing what Sonic almost was when he was a bunny known as Feels the Rabbit. These cosmetics are kinda similar to how the soap shoes were for Sonic Frontiers. But to get all this content would require me to buy the digital deluxe version. And there is no way in hell that I would ever buy this game for $70. I'm not insane. Now, just like any other Sonic game, the music has always been an integral part of the franchise, and normally that's something that's always been done correctly. So how's this soundtrack? Well, it's complicated. There are some amazing tracks like Bridge Island Zone and Lagoon City Act 2. Now while tracks like the ones I listed are really good and the one that's playing is one of my favorites, unfortunately Jun Sonoe served as the director for the music in Sonic Superstars. Now some of you may be asking me, why is this unfortunate? Well, he's the guy that brought you the music from Sonic Forward. So my issue with the soundtrack is that in this case, it's literally a hit or miss. Since we are very lucky, Jun Sonoe actually received assistance from internal teams at Sega and T. Lopes, the composer of the amazing soundtrack from Sonic Mania. So we have tracks sounding like they got ripped right out of Sonic 4, or new amazing tracks that felt like they got ripped right out of Sonic Mania. So it's not hard to see which one's the clear choice when it comes to saying who's better. Don't get me wrong though, Jun Sonoe has had amazing works in the past, like his work with the adventure titles. Classic games are just somewhere where he should not be residing in. My only main issue with this soundtrack, honestly, is that I wish it was consistent. Due to the fact that not a lot of the tracks aren't by the same composer, I constantly wonder if the next level's music is going to be enjoyable or not. So honestly, this soundtrack is very B tier for me. When it comes to the general presentation and the overall look of this game, it's clear to see Sega split away from the traditional pixel art of the classic Sonic games that they're known for, and instead opted for 3D models. This 2.5D style is honestly one I'm not a huge fan of. Pixel art is something that I think can still work and look really well, and especially when it comes to Sonic. Titles like Sonic Mania prove that even today. And not even just Mania, but a lot of fan games prove that pixel art absolutely can still look gorgeous. One thing I can give credit for where it's due though is the expressiveness of every character. Something as small as the idle animation alone lets you see how each of these characters are in personality, and this reflects in something as little as that. The stages themselves also have moments where they look amazing, and a lot of these zone themes are super well designed in my opinion. One zone to mention has to be Cyber Station, a level that makes you all pixelated and feel like the gamer world, and although it's super cool in conception, the execution is not the best. Instead of making Sonic and friends look all blocky and ugly, another approach they could have taken could have been the Mario Odyssey style, where you actually transition into the classic 2D, maybe even bringing back those first 2D sprites. And I know this is nitpicking, but going super while in a blocky state also makes you turn into your original Super model, which kind of feels lazy in my opinion. Now overall, we've gone over a lot of content and have seen a look at what Superstars brings. So what's the final verdict? Sonic Superstars is definitely a brand new take, at least from what I've seen from the classic Sonic formula. It feels like something new out of something old, and is an interesting way to mesh past ideas and concepts to see where it takes the series. The conception for this game is genuinely an interesting one, but the execution is just not the best. I was so hyped when I saw some of the first trailers for this game, and I'm just disappointed with how the final result and my final opinion of the game has just come out to seen. The introduction of new characters like Trip is definitely a welcome addition as well, and I hope she definitely sticks around. Eventually maybe we'll also see something like Sonic Superstars Plus, where we might even see Mighty and Ray come back as extra DLC. Now going from the gameplay to the story and just overall the music and the presentation, Sonic Superstars is something I genuinely can say I'm a large fan of, or something I'd be revisiting anytime soon. This game feels like it takes one step forward and 5 steps back, and it's just to the point where I feel like I can't even stand this game sometimes. Unfortunately, that's what makes this game so disappointing for me in the first place. So with all that in mind, is it the worst Sonic game in the series? Hell no, far from it. But definitely it could have done so much better. But hey, maybe that's just me. Hey, and welcome to the end of the video. Socials to my Twitter, Twitch, and Discord will be in the description down below if that interests you. Huge thank you to all my members of the channel, and thank you guys for even giving me a dime. If you guys want to have your name be at the end of videos, be sure to press that join button right next to the subscribe button, which you should also totally press because guess what, it's free, and if you regret it for whatever reason whatsoever, you can always come back and unsubscribe later if you'd like to. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great one.